Paramount Studios, the studio responsible for films like Titanic and Iron Man. With over 100 years of history in the film industry, it is safe to say that they have a pretty good idea on how to make it in the film business. But just how did Paramount Studios start? And what happened to them? But before we continue, make sure to give this video a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon to be the first to be notified of new behind-the-business videos that we post every week. Let's begin. It is the year 1891, and an 18-year-old man by the name of Adolf Zukar arrives in New York City after a long journey from Hungary to start a new life. Like most immigrants around this time, Zukar came to America in the hopes of chasing the American dream. He immediately got to learning English and started to work various jobs to get by, and eventually made connections and business partners along the way. Around the turn of the century in 1903, as Adolf amassed a considerable amount of savings, his cousin, a man by the name of Max Goldstein, who had also recently arrived from Hungary, asked him for a loan to invest in a movie theater chain. Now, you have to understand that at that point in time, movie theaters were an incredibly novel concept at the time. They weren't as enjoyable or artistic as a traditional theater, but the novelty of them caused them to start surging in popularity. In order to capitalize on the growing popularity, Adolf decided to not only loan his cousin the money, but also became actively involved in the movie theater industry himself. Eventually, he found partners Daniel Frohman and Charles Frohman, both of whom had vast experience owning and running numerous Nickelodeons across the United States. It was at this point in 1912 that the three men founded the Famous Players Film Company. The Famous Players Film Company planned on creating their own feature-length films that would be played in movie theaters owned by them. The plan was to feature some of the leading actors and actresses in the theater scene at the time, winning the audience over and ultimately making people choose film over stage performances. Movie theaters at the time, at least in the United States, rarely ever showed feature-length films. But the Famous Players eventually managed to distribute their first film, a French movie called The Loves of Queen Elizabeth. The silent film was a staggering 54 minutes long, and it was one of the first films in history to have its own score. Despite the risk, it managed to become quite successful at the box office, and it led to the studio starting work on their first production titled The Count of Monte Cristo. Even though it was a silent film, it was the first of its kind and surprisingly was well received by the public. 2 years later, in another part of the United States, a man by the name of Jesse L. Lasky founded another film production studio called Jesse L. Lasky Films. Unlike Famous Players, Lasky was located in Los Angeles, as he wanted to take advantage of the better weather and filming locations to produce films. There was also the cost, which compared to New York was significantly cheaper as well. In 1914, Lasky produced the first feature-length film that would ever be made in Hollywood, titled The Squaw Man. It was made with a budget of around $40,000, but ended up earning almost $500,000 at the box office. Needless to say, it was one of the most successful films of all time. Around the same time, a Utah-based theater owner named W.W. Hodgkinson started to buy out numerous theater chains in a bid to own the first nationwide theater chain in the United States. He named this company the Paramount Pictures Corporation. And just like that, Paramount started to sign distribution deals with various film production studios such as Famous Players and Jesse L. Lasky. This proved to be extremely lucrative for all three parties, and it ushered in a new era for feature films in the country. By 1916, the three-way partnership between Lasky, Famous Players, and Paramount had proven to be quite successful nationwide. And as all of the parties involved relied heavily on each other for business, it gave Adolf Zukar the idea for a merging of the three companies into one, engineering the deals that resulted in Paramount Pictures. By 1919, Paramount Pictures owned hundreds of movie theaters, while concurrently producing dozens of films in Hollywood every year. This made Paramount unique in a sense. It was the first film production company that could guarantee its films would have a place to be distributed, since it kinda owned the distribution chain as well. On top of that, since Paramount owned the movie theaters, these theaters would only play Paramount films, thus flattening any competition that was in its way. The golden age of Hollywood was well underway, and the lack of any serious competition cemented Paramount's success. During this age, many prominent Hollywood stars started to get a huge fan following around them. To capitalize on this newfound fanfare with stars, Paramount started to sign numerous actors and actresses to block booking contracts. which meant that the actresses were contracted to Paramount over a specific period of time, shooting back-to-back movies, not leaving any room for other studios to hire them. Then it was also set in place that if any exhibitors wanted to play films starring these artists, they would have to buy a bulk of Paramount films in the process as well. Even though this practice was considered a breach of antitrust regulations, the government did not step in, propelling Paramount to the top of the film industry in the United States. Things were going great. However, in the late 1920s, the Great Depression had hit the United States, and almost every major industry was facing a huge loss in sales. The film industry was no different. Paramount Pictures were seriously struggling as people were not willing to shell out to see films anymore. Eventually, by the mid-1930s, Paramount found itself tens of millions of dollars in debt, which was primarily due to its overexpansion of theaters and the expensive contracts it signed with various celebrities. And unfortunately, on a fateful April 25, 1935, Paramount Pictures filed for Section 77B bankruptcy. However, due to the sheer size of the company, diluting the company would do more harm to the economy, and eventually the court ordered that the company be restructured. Almost all of the previous employees were replaced with more experienced executives, and a man named John E. Otterson became the president of Paramount Pictures, Inc. He started to rebuild the foundations of the company, and within a year, Paramount Pictures was up and running again. Zukor, who previously left due to the struggles the company was facing, surprisingly returned to the company the following year, taking on the role as a production chief and later as the symbolic chairman. Around the same time, a man named Barney Balaban would replace Otterson as the new president of the company. Balaban brought in a new vision as he wanted to bring the company to new heights, as he worked on fusing the previous success it had before the Great Depression and a new way of doing things. With the restructuring underway, Paramount entered the Golden Age, even relisting itself on the New York Stock Exchange, being one of the handful of the film studios to be listed there. Using their old model of signing stars and using their large chain of movie theaters to their advantage, Paramount started churning out more films than ever before, releasing around 60 to 70 films a year in the later half of the 30s. They re-established themselves at the top of the film industry. Paramount Pictures were also responsible for creating some of the major stars like Mae West, and within this era they were also able to take away part of the animation market share from Disney and Hanna-Barbera by producing franchises like Betty Boop and the famous Popeye the Sailor Man. According to some polls, Popeye the Sailor Man was even more popular than Mickey Mouse, and Betty Boop, being one of the first leading female cartoon characters, played a crucial role in Paramount obtaining a large female demographic. In 1940, Paramount's success was simply too much for the U.S. Supreme Court of Justice to ignore, and during that year, they forced Paramount to discontinue its block booking practice, putting a halt to the exclusive deals the stars were signing. Even though this led to Paramount cutting back on production of films, it kind of backfired on the rulemakers and gave Paramount an even larger monopoly over the film industry, as Paramount still had control over a large number of movie theaters in certain large markets like Detroit. Thus, they were still able to control the movies that were accessible to the audience. Business was good for Paramount Pictures, but there were people who thought that their anti-competitive behavior was really getting out of hand. Eventually, this problem escalated and the Free Trade Commission reopened their case against Paramount, and a Supreme Court ruling was put in place. What this meant was Paramount was being split into two companies: Paramount Pictures, which owned the production side of things, and United Paramount Theaters, which owned all of the theaters. Because of this incident, the ruling also decided that major film production studios were no longer able to own movie theater chains as well. This caused the domino effect, and soon other film production studios that operated under the same model followed suit. The split marked an end to the reign of Paramount Pictures, and it was all downhill from here. They no longer had the unfair advantage over the competition, and they weren't able to keep up with the likes of Disney and Universal. It was now a countdown to when the company would eventually shut down operations, with its two main competitors itching to take over the Hollywood properties and facilities. Things took a turn when they realized they could no longer compete and started letting go of some of its homegrown franchises, selling off DreamWorks to Warner Brothers and Marvel to Disney. Both studios of which you can find out more about if you click the pop-up banner at the top to watch our video covering them. Till date, Paramount still retains some franchises such as Star Trek, The Godfather, Indiana Jones, G.I. Joe, and the entire Transformers franchise. But you can tell that the studio is not what it used to be, and it will never rise up to its former glory ever again. Such a pity. Overall, we can't ignore the fact that the film industry as we know it today would look wildly different without Paramount Pictures. And even with all of the anti-competitive controversy, the company still holds a special place in every film lover's heart. Let us know your thoughts. Did Paramount Pictures make the right decision to sell off its properties? Leave us a comment down in the description. As always, if you enjoyed this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon to be the first to be notified of new behind-the-business videos we post every week. Be inspired, and we will see you in the next one. Since you made it all the way to this point, here are 2 more videos that YouTube thinks you are going to love. Go on, click on it. Let's see if they're right.